Okay, as you can see, while we were waiting for this to dry, I took some time to fill in this shape a little bit, the third tomato with a neutral tint on it. And I'm going to paint a little of this green to start with, just so that we get something on here. I'm just using a little bit of sap green, and I'm probably going to put in just a tad of permanent rose so it's not quite so bright. And I'm going to work fairly saturated, and make sure you get a good point on your brush so that you can get into those little edges that are going to require a lot of control. So this will be my first layer while this is dry. And you see the puddle? We got to get rid of that puddle. It's too much water. Even though it makes it lighter, it needs to be gotten rid of so you don't have this thing bleeding to the edges. So at this point I can just probably put one layer of green all over everything because it's nice and light, and then I can go back in and I can add some darker saturation where we need the full saturation of the local color rather than highlight and shadow. And we might even find that as we are working that you may have to add more neutral tint. But generally at this point, you probably can just use a darker saturation of the local color to achieve what it is that you want for the appearance of these bracts and leaves and stems, I mean. Now, some of this is, you can see there's a little bit of roughness here and here. I'm not going to worry about that too much because I'm going to be able to go in later with dry brush, which will be another lesson, and maybe we'll even save this for that purpose so you can see how this can work as a solution for what look like errors. So in some places I can put in a little darker color and it'll blend into the lighter shade because it's wet. And now I'm going to just leave it alone. Well, I said I was going to leave it alone. Just one more little thing. I got a little bit of a puddle there, so I'm going to pick that up just so that it doesn't go wandering off like a lost child. Okay, let's go back to our other tomato. I'm going to use a little bit more Scarlet Lake. And I'm going to start to lay this color in a little stronger. And hopefully I won't put my hand on the green paint like I did earlier with the red. Now you see I have that dark edge, but that's disappearing now because now we're adding a bit more color to the whole process. And then the last colors will be these darker reds. Keep cleaning my brush, wiping it so it's not too wet so that I can manage the edges. Red is a little forgiving. So if it dries a little, you're probably going to be all right. The brush is very dry right now, and I'm trying to keep it clean so that I can get some nice gradation out of it. Drying my brush off, cleaning it and drying it off in my fingers, just pulling the moisture out in my hands like so. I find that's the most gentle on the brush, because when you wipe this thing on anything, even a nice gentle cloth, it tends to be abrasive for the brush. I'm going to leave a little bit of lightness along this edge to kind of account for some ambient light. And it'll act as a secondary highlight as well, which is basically what ambient light becomes. And you can see as you add more color, the layers tend to blend a little bit more easily, especially if you're, if the underlying paper is still a little moist and starting to come together. Here, good. Maybe a little bit more red up in here. Don't mess with it too much, because you'll overwork it. All right, so we can wait for that to dry, and now we can go back to our. Let's finish the green on this other guy. Mix up some green and permanent rose. I'm gonna work on this stem here. Clean the brush. A lot of cleaning that goes on. And go back to my other diluted wash, because when I put another layer on, it'll make it a little darker. Make sure you have a really nice sharp brush. And you can see already the stem is starting to take shape, or the bracts in the stem. And in some case, all you really need to do is put multiple layers of that first thin wash that you had on there to create some form. Okay, let's see what this one's doing. I think I'm going to go to a little bit of, I'm going to mix a little permanent rose with the Scarlet Lake at this point. But just toning it back, making it a little cooler. And now we're going to add some shadows using the local color so that it appears to have a little bit more translucency, a little depth, a little more interest. So I've got these shapes on there, and now I'm going to clean my brush pretty well, pretty dry, and blend them in. As soon as you see yourself making the mark, you gotta clean that brush, because all you'll be doing is spreading the paint more than you need to. Because these transitions now are pretty short transitions. They're not, you're not filling large areas. cleaning the brush, drying it off, getting the most of the moisture out. So you just have a little bit of moisture is really key. And I just may take some of this stronger. This is just Permanent Rose now that I'm patching in. My brush is really dry. So we're going to leave this at this point because then we can go back in later when we talk about dry brush, and you can see how using the dry brush will even some of this stuff out and it becomes this nice smooth tomato that you want. What I did here was it picked up a little too much color. So I'm going back to the mix that I made with the Permanent Rose and the Scarlet Lake and just dropping in a little bit more pigment in those thin areas. That's not as dark as the Permanent Rose. And then go back with Permanent Rose again. And I will stop playing with it. Again, I'm only touching the edges of where I laid more pigment down so that I don't start spreading things around too much. Okay, I hope this helps. You can work a little more slowly than I have and put on more layers than I've put on. And I'm looking at this and thinking, I may add more yellow to this. So once this dries, I'm going to even some of this out with dry brush, and I may put a little wash of yellow on this to make it a little bit more exciting. So there you have your next project.